woman, Judge LaJune Lange. Judge Lange started her career with the Public Defender's Office in Hennepin County, and then, of course, ascended to the level of a judge with the 4th District in the state of Minnesota. As part of her retirement, she's been active in so many different projects in the community. First of all, founding the International Leadership Institute, which has done initiatives to improve infrastructure in Africa, in countries in Africa, as well as projects here domestically. But recently, Judge has focused a lot on the African-American community, the history of the African-American community in the Twin Cities area. And so today, she's going to present the Longfellow project, and we're going to hear more about that effort. Yeah, Judge.
As a retired Rotarian, I'm going to put $1 in honor of Barry's new admission to the Rotary Club.
Yay!
And I want to let Domenica come on up and start our film. The International Leadership Institute has been doing historical research on the early formation of Minnesota. So one of the areas of importance that we have been working on is the area around Fort Snelling and the settlement of African descendant people on Native American land, and the Fort Snelling role in terms of bringing African descendant people in great numbers to Minnesota in 1863. So if you want to start, then we'll play this for a while, then we'll take a break, and I'll talk about it, and then we'll have questions. Okay.
Begins on the tranquil shores of the Mississippi. This is Fort Snelling State Park.
The microphone next to
You can pull it off.
Okay. Sorry, folks.
Our journey, or at least part of it, begins on the tranquil shores of the Mississippi. This is Fort Snelling State Park.
So ready to turn it up.
What used to be Dakota
It's all the way up.
and what they believe was a place
You have a speaker, or I can leave the microphone.
There should be volume control. Yeah. You think there was in the system we could do it louder?
See if that helps.
I'm gonna leave the microphone here.
Just turn it all the way up.
Our journey, or at least part of it, begins on the tranquil shores of the Mississippi. This is Fort Snelling State Park, what used to be Dakota land, and what they believe was a place of creation. This same land would be the origin of many African American roots in Minnesota. In 1863, the Davenport and Raleigh brought more than 500 newly freed enslaved men, women, and children from the South. The boat stopped right here. Their ropes were tied around these very trees, leaving century-old scars in the wood. In the oral tradition of the Dakota people, So where do we go from here?
Originally, we started off on 2023 Bloomington, then we moved across the street from this fire station on 36th Avenue. My grandparents bought their property from one of the firemen here. Our grandparents had the two lots that were on Hiawatha, and our lot was directly behind theirs. And my cousins, my uncle's lot was next to us.
No, it was the most amazing childhood. My grandparents were there, and my father's only sibling, their family lived right next door, so we always had each other. We used to ride our bikes all over. We had relatives that lived another couple of miles further from the golf course. But we used to fish at the golf course. We would always swim. We'd ride our bikes there.
In the springtime, when the golf course would flood, there'd be ponds with carp in them. We hit a spear in the water, and sometimes we'd cut practice and spearfish instead.
He didn't talk about it a lot. I know that he was very, very well respected.
My dad was in the 784th Tank Battalion. Mom was in the 688 Mail Detachment, and she was assigned in England. That was a male battalion. They were supposed to fail. They apparently had about a 2-year backlog of mail that these ladies in 6 months had cleared up, had come up with a method of identifying different soldiers with the same name and getting the mail to the right people.
Grew up in South Minneapolis, yeah. Right on 44th and Oakland. So 44th and Oakland, 44th and 3rd, and now I live on 44th and Park. Everybody in the neighborhood was like a family, like I say, it takes a village to raise them, you know? I mean, everybody knew each other, you know, the kids would all be outside playing, if one of us messed up, one of the parents, you know, everybody knew it, so. Yeah, that's what I miss about it. Oh, yeah, I got that high walk a lot. When I was probably 12 or 13, I used to go up there to caddy, which was, you know, the highlight of my weekend, you know, because that was fun, you know, and that doesn't even happen anymore. I saw my Aunt Jane was, I guess, probably one of the best golfers that everybody talked about. But her being a woman and of color, they wouldn't let her play. That golf course is black history in Minnesota, and it needs to stay. He would be either my 3rd or 4th grade uncle. I do have a packet of history. We got our family reunion, and John Cheatham is buried at the cemetery in Cedar. You know, everybody claims that they're the first black family in Minnesota, you know, but we do got some history. We've been around for a while.
Just do a little bit more on this.
my family, we basically just worked ourselves down 4th Avenue from East 25th Street to, the home that I live in right now is on 4th Avenue in South Minneapolis. Went to Bryan Junior High School, so I think very affectionately about 38th Street and 4th Avenue. The church that I still attend and my family attend is on 41st and 4th Avenue. My family, my dad and mom moved us out to 42nd and Oakland, which is a few blocks off of 4th Avenue. The grade school I went to was Field, which is from 46th to 4th. So yeah, I remember all the addresses, and they were all in the vicinity of 4th Avenue through South Minneapolis. Donald W. McMore, but he was best known as Bill McMore. He was a graduate of South High School, went to the University of Minnesota. You see, he did his graduate work, and he was one of the early teachers in the Minneapolis public schools, because it wasn't until, if my memory serves me correct, it wasn't until the mid-50s, to late 50s, where teachers for the Minneapolis public schools hired African-American people to teach in the school system. And of course, you know, he talked about what it was like to climb the ladder in the Minneapolis public schools, but there certainly were issues. You know, he believed he was looked over at certain times because of race, class, and culture. He truly loved working with young folks and working in the Minneapolis public schools. That was very important to him. Way back when, and I've been able to go back to the early 1800s when my family migrated from the south because we worked the plantations, went to South Carolina to Virginia, and came into Hastings, Minnesota, is where my grandmother was raised, and her family's name was the Wallace family. And there's several Wallace family members that, you know, resided in South Minneapolis, are still close to, or are still close to South Minneapolis. And along Franklin Avenue South, there's there's more than several old South Minneapolis families that lived in that area and went to South High School, okay? And so when that neighborhood started to fall apart, it curved around, 35W picked up, and then it worked its way down. Down actually alongside 4th Avenue, over where 35W is now. So again, if you look at maps, you can see how the freeway kind of pushed our neighborhood further.
We're gonna stop there. If you're interested, our film is on YouTube, under Longfellow, Our Journey. I'm gonna have Judge Lange speak about it.
The International Leadership Institute has been working to close a knowledge gap with regard to early settlement of African descendant people in Minnesota. I'm sure many of you have heard about the Bonga family and heard about Dred and Harriet Scott, but the information kind of drops off from there. So we started looking at what is in the record, what is in the oral history, and we teamed up with the Longfellow Community Council to take one of the oldest known areas in South Minneapolis and start looking at who lived there. So Longfellow is a neighborhood that lies in the original footprint of Fort Snelling. So Fort Snelling extended from the buildings that you see by the airport all the way to St. Anthony Falls when they first established it. So gradually Fort Snelling's footprint got smaller, but the activities of Fort Snelling in terms of being the largest site of enslavement in the Wisconsin Territory and later Minnesota continued. So the military was allowed by the government, and the only branch of the federal government, to have slaves. So the U.S. military also gave an allowance to its officers to maintain this domestic help. That allowance did not go to the enslaved person. It just served to boost the pay of the person who kept an enslaved human being. So Fort Snelling not only housed Dred and Harriet Scott, but 30 to 100 other slaves. So the Minnesota Historical Society has so far acknowledged about 30 slaves being at Fort Snelling, and their information is coming from pay records that are at the Federal Archives in Washington, D.C., where they would remit to the soldiers who had the enslaved person those allowances. So they had to at least give a first name, date, and send the money through the paymaster. So there are records showing that these payments were made. So when Dred Scott was enslaved by Dr. Emerson at Fort Snelling, he was also, Dr. Emerson was receiving those benefits. So even though Dred and Harriet Scott were able to be at Fort Snelling alone, and that was the basis for the federal lawsuit, Dr. Emerson could still receive those payments even though he wasn't there with them at Fort Snelling. And the benefit of Dred Scott is that he could be more like an independent contractor and try to barter his services for money, which he did. So we have a formal system of enslavement, which some of the staff at Fort Snelling say is every bit as onerous as plantation slavery in the South. Fort Snelling had a garden of 400 acres, so there was lots of manual labor to produce the food for the fort, prepare the firewood, clean the buildings, take care of the horses for the cavalry, support all the other activities that were going on, and take care of the families and the laundry and everything to keep a fort of that size running. So when we had the Civil War and the Dakota conflict going on at the same time, we also had, in 1862, our U.S. Congress passed a Homestead Act, which allowed people from all over the world to come to Minnesota and farm and claim acres of land. And in order for farmers to come and occupy somebody else's land, they needed the military to protect them. So as they squeezed the Native American people and deported them and placed them in the concentration camps at Fort Snelling, the military began to hire steamboats to take those who were of the Dakota Uprising and being expelled from Minnesota, take them away from Minnesota on steamboats. They also used many of these same steamboats to bring Native American people, at least bring African American people who were then settling in what were called contraband camps along the Mississippi, and Benton Barracks near St. Louis was one of the larger contraband camps, and those camps were overflowing. I think you understand when Lincoln and all the administration saw the Civil War, they saw it as something that'd be over in 6 months. Well, years later, there's still no infrastructure to care for those who were displaced, what they labeled as contraband, enslaved people who escaped to Union lines. There was no formal system to care for them. And so they started forming these contraband camps, and they passed the Confiscation Act, which allowed the contraband people to actually work for the military and receive some sort of pay. So Sibley and others brought several steamboats up the Mississippi with African descendant people. Well, the African descendant people had been enslaved, they had been disparaged, they had no rights, and when the recruiters came and said, you can go to Fort Snelling, you can work as a teamster for the military, drive a wagon and deliver food to the newly formed forts that were heading toward North and South Dakota, come and join. So when the people got on the steamboats, they brought their wives and kids. So suddenly Fort Snelling was in a state of shock. They thought they'd just get the cream of the crop and just get some working age men and be able to move on from there. But the women and children came because people wanted to keep their families intact. And so they came up to Fort Snelling. 3 steamboats we've been able to document in May of 1863. And that is the War Eagle, the Northerner, and the Davenport. I suspect the more we dig, the more we'll find smaller numbers coming, but almost 500 people were counted coming up. So some of those people ended up, including Reverend Hickman, going to St. Paul, founding Pilgrim Baptist Church, establishing the Rondo neighborhood, and continuously committing to civic life. Another part of that group settled in South Minneapolis, around Longfellow, around Central, around Minnehaha Falls, and those areas. And many of those people who settled in those areas, that area after it was no longer Fort Snelling was called Richfield. Anybody heard of Richfield? So I headed over to the Richfield Historical Society expecting to find a treasure trove, and they said, we didn't have a newspaper, we didn't record anything, we were farmers. So there's not a lot of information other than when African descendant people enlisted to fight in the Civil War, many of them listed their community as Richfield. So we have 104 African descendant people who came mostly out of those steamboats, and some who were already living here who volunteered to serve in the Civil War as soon as African descendant people were permitted to fight. And as our history goes in the United States, they were fighting in a segregated corps. The U.S. military didn't desegregate till 1948. So the U.S. Colored Troops was formed, but necessity is the mother of invention. So many African descendant people went with the 1st Minnesota and others as undercooks, drivers, and other unmilitary labels to be a part and support the war effort. So what we're doing with the International Leadership Institute is we're trying to lift up these lives, be able to show who lived where, at what time, who contributed. So the 688 that Mr. Lee talked about with World War II and his mother, they received a Congressional Gold Medal recently. But that news and that honor hasn't reached the Lee family in Minnesota. So we're hoping that that will happen, where they will receive a visit and a replica Medal of Honor for the service of getting those letters from home. You can imagine the umpteen million Andersons and Ericksons that were bogged down at the post office in England, that they were able to sort out and get the correct Anderson to get their letter and the correct Erickson to get their letters. So they had an ingenious system that was able to sort out that hopeless backlog of mail in less than 6 months and keep up the morale of the soldiers who hadn't been hearing from their families. And the Lee family goes back to the fire station number 24. And fire station number 24, as you saw in the film, was located at 4501 Hiawatha Avenue, built in 1907. And the unique part about fire station 24 is that the city of Minneapolis decided to erect an all-black fire station. And when questioned, the fire chief said, this is a necessity. Our white crews don't want to sleep in the same beds of the black crews, and for their peace of mind, we feel a black station is appropriate. So Fire Station 24, opened in 1907, closed in 1941, was primarily during that time all black officers manning the fire station, and they had horses. So they not only had to man the fire station and the chemical rig, but they also had to take care of 3 horses. They had the hay loft, they had the feed bags, they had the mucking, they had the exercising, everything to do to keep the horses well so they could respond to the fires. And so I'm hoping to keep digging and get some urban oral history about these firefighters riding down the back roads in the Longfellow neighborhood exercising their horses. And so we want to say this story will continue. We thank you for your interest, and we are so happy to be here today, and thank you, Barry, for the invitation.
Judge Lange, thank you so much for sharing this really important history, which has for far too long been overlooked. And for someone who's not from Minnesota, this is very helpful. I really do appreciate learning more about this. I know we all do. And in honor of you and the Institute and the history, this important, vital history of Minnesota that you're sharing, we have a little history of our own. These are just, it's a small token of our appreciation. These are note cards that have pictures from the past photo contest winners of the annual Views of the Golden Valley, Views of the Valley photo contest. So if you have to write to anybody, do some correspondence, kind of old school style, hope that you'll be able to use these and remember being a part of this Rotary Club today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really
What an
appreciate
honor.
that.
Thank you very much.
So folks, we're going to